Thank the Lord. I thought this day would never come. So let's talk about season 1 of Classic Who. 36, 37 episodes, and something that I didn't appreciate was that, unlike, I guess, more modern Who, even though there are 2-3-parters, these are like 5-6-parter episodes, far shorter than Doctor Who that we know at the moment, where you're looking at something like 25 to 30 minutes. But man, they're jam-packed with story. William Hartnell is I've seen bits of Once Upon a Time Lord, I think it is, where he comes back but played as the chap who plays Wilder Frey and Argus Filch from Harry Potter, and also the documentary / film that they did, which I'd love to do a reaction with some of the Doctor Who cast, or some people that haven't seen it before, because man, that's a tearjerker in itself, and it's beautiful. So let's dive in. I didn't really know what to expect. I knew obviously that it's going to be in black and white, which is fine. That wasn't a shock to me, given the time it was filmed. Obviously it was going to be. I didn't know what the budget was going to be like. I didn't know what the sets were going to be like. And one thing, it's not even a criticism, it's just a joy to the kind of the camera work and the things that they pulled to be able to get around certain issues. But if you have like an eternal corridor in a scene, like there were plenty of these in the Dalek story, or in I can't remember the name of the first episode, but where they go to this weird beach that's got like poisonous waters. There's a monolith that has like eternal corridors or eternal sides of it, and you can see that they very clearly put like a bit of cardboard in, which just continues to paint the eternal corridor, which I think is lovely. It's such fun, and I love it. And it's obviously a way to get around it, because they wouldn't spend all that time building an eternal set, because that would take an insane amount of money and time, and it's a way to work around it. And having not seen any of the first season, which I know they've started at least to do in colour, like the Dalek story, I don't know how that would look, because not only is it black and white, but it's also quite grainy, so you can't quite tell. Like, there's certain shots in the Dalek episode, which I didn't realise until one of my co-hosts pointed out to me, but where you've got like the Dalek I guess like meeting room or whatever, you've got these walls where they've also got cardboard cutouts of Daleks, kind of like what they did in the original theatrical release of A New Hope, Star Wars, where at the very end, when you got the medal giving ceremony and Chewie, Han and Luke walk down the aisleway, at the very beginning there's a load of soldiers that are on like podiums that are risen above the rest of the audience, I guess, and they're all cardboard cutouts. It's bits like that are just kind of fun to notice and be like, that's how they got around that. And to be fair, with the Daleks, I wouldn't have noticed had someone not pointed it out, because the Daleks aren't like humans. They're not constantly moving ever so slightly. They can be 100% rigid, and obviously these Daleks being cardboard cutouts, that wouldn't have necessarily caught my eye if they weren't moving for a long period of time. So it's just fun. But one thing I want to say straight off the bat, and I don't know if it's necessarily a what's the word I'm looking for, whether it's not a popular opinion, but I don't think the Dalek story is the best one in season 1. The Sensorites. So the Sensorites are probably my favourite wee story. The costume design for the Sensorites were really interesting. I'd love to see them as a recurring creature, because they weren't necessarily villainous. There were some that were, and there were some that aren't, which I think is quite interesting to see, because we haven't really seen that since, well, at least in New Who. Ones that come to mind, the Half, I guess. They're not necessarily villainous as such, and it's the same with the Sensorites. And there's a beautifully terrifying scene, which is the end of one of the episodes, where I think it's one of the companions points out the window to get the Doctor's attention. There's just this Sensorite with like his hand up against the window as he rises up. Very similar to Linda with a Y in I don't know if it's Bad Wolf or the second to, I think it's the last episode of Eccleston's run, where the Daleks raise up outside the window, and you've got that kind of chilling moment, and it was very reminiscent of that. I mean, obviously they got the cheesiness where they just put the da 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 in, which they do a lot during this first season. But once again, it's the first season of Doctor Who. It's going to be cheesy. It's going to be fun, and I really enjoyed it. And the companions, I thought I was interested that I suppose the Doctor's trying to find his way back to their time, so he's kind of stuck with them. But I was interested to see how the dynamic and the family element kind of built up about them, because it must, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're like school teachers to Susan's school. That's the reason why they even get involved, because they weirdly follow her to this junkyard and find the TARDIS. And Susan being the granddaughter of the Doctor, and I know a few people who haven't watched Classic Who but have seen the 1965, I think it was 1965 film, Doctor Who and the Daleks, which is essentially just a retelling of the William Hartnell story. My favourite update to it is the bit where Susan's writing the letter to the natives of Skaro, and she's got like lava lamps around her, and it's like the most futuristic thing they could throw in, like, ooh, is this thing that's like a big gloopy tube, and they thought that would be something only the Daleks would have, and it became like a fixture of most young teens' rooms. It's just fun. But yeah, it's not my favorite out of the entire story. It is the one I mentioned earlier, that with the costume designs are just really interesting, and the story, I think it was more intriguing to me. So I had to quickly look because I can't pronounce this name. I think it's Altlock. When they go back to the Aztecs times, Altlock is just so much fun. As a character, he's an absolute joy on screen, even though he's technically a villain. The costume design of him's really interesting, with like the kind of crisscross pikes that he's got coming out of his headdress with the feathers and the half painted face, and he's just a real fun character, and I just enjoy. And interestingly, I seem to remember my grandfather would dabble in old Who when it was just on TV. I guess it was really old reruns, and Old Lock's episodes would always be the ones that would play. And even then, like looking at this season and watching these episodes, I thought, I know this villainous character. I know whenever he was on or making like a treacherous decision, they'd always play on the xylophone, and Altlock is that very vivid memory of sitting there in my grandparents' lounge and watching old Who. I mean, something that I'd love to kind of experience, but I suppose I never will, is the sheer fear around the Daleks and certain alien creatures, because I remember my dad, and I've heard multiple times, I mean, I'm fairly sure Russell T Davies has said in numerous interviews when he watched old Who as a very young child, he would be hiding behind the settee when it came to the Daleks, and I don't suppose we'll ever have that, because maybe it was the black and whiteness of it, or also there's something there's a lot to be said about saturation of horror elements in popular media now, because Doctor Who was unlike anything anyone had ever seen then, but now where you're kind of throwing children into, and I think it's important. One thing we will talk about at some point, either in like a Doctor Who episode or just me, is my real belief that it is important to scare children. And watching things like the animated film The Black Cauldron or Dark Crystal and things like that, where they have very vivid horror elements despite being for kids, is very important, because it helps develop a mind and helps to create I'm not going to go into this too much because that's for another day, but I think it's important. But from that, there have still been Doctor Who elements that have been truly terrifying. I remember the Idiot's Lantern, which isn't a highly rated Doctor Who episode, at least from what I understand, but the moment when they go upstairs and they turn on the light and the elderly lady's just standing there with no face, and I remember just running out of the room, because it's just like, that old lady should have a face. She doesn't have a face. She should have a face. There's no face. Why does that old lady have no face? And I hid on the stairs and refused to come back down because it just terrified the shit out of me. And Doctor Who, I want more of that. We had little elements. I mean, Wild Blue Yonder is said to be the scariest. I don't necessarily think so. I think the Giggle has far scarier moments with the little dolls and those kind of creepy elements. But especially with I can't remember the name of the doll, but the one that is essentially the first image for television, and when its jaw snaps open from the fact that it's on fire, is really vividly terrifying. But yeah, I'm hoping that we'll get more of those terrifying elements in Russell T Davies, because I think that's an element of Doctor Who that needs to be there still, is the terrifying bits, like Midnight as an example, or the Empty Child and things like that. But we'll go into those as maybe we'll do like a Doctor Who marathon of the scariest episodes, and those will definitely be on there. One thing I wanted to kind of cover is, I don't know whether this was down to budgeting or what, but it seems like, and this is something that I think they covered in the film documentary about William Hartnell and his era of Doctor Who, where he started to struggle with the lines and things like that. But it seems like this is also quite, it is there occasionally in this first season, but everyone else does trip over their lines as well. Like, there are points where they repeat themselves. There's even one point where one of them's trying to say something, they're like, and almost breaks character. So I don't know whether they had like a limited amount of takes where these giant cameras would only have a certain amount of film on them, and they were just like, we're taking the best take we have and that is it. I don't know, but it'd be interesting if someone knew to kind of throw it in the comments, because I imagine that is the case, just simply because of how many times it happens. It doesn't necessarily break me out of it, because I think that's something that you don't really see in media these days, is that people can trip over their words generally, because sometimes people's minds, they're talking fast and their minds are working, especially in a stressful situation, and then everyone's just so composed in their vocabulary and it seems almost unrealistic. You've either got one extreme or the other. You've got the King's speech, where obviously that one of the main focuses is that he had a speech impediment, or bits of the Imitation Game, where Alan Turing's gone through his quote-unquote treatment and is very kind of stuttery over his words. But you don't really see it in normal speech. Everyone's quite composed in the way that they talk, and it's like they've had time to think about what they're going to say before they say it. So in a way, it's kind of nice to see them kind of trip over their words, because it feels more natural in a way. Again, throw it in the comments if you're like, no, that sucks. Why would we want to see that? That's awful. We'd love it. No. But for me, it seems more natural, I guess. But yeah, I mean, obviously this is a very different Doctor Who experience to what we're used to. Because it would be, because it's 60 years old, and I think that's what a lot of people don't appreciate when they attempt to dive into old Who, or are so apprehensive about doing it, because of this very reason, that it's old and it's grainy and it's black and white and the acting's sometimes cheesy, and yeah, it's a completely different Doctor Who experience, but it's one that I'm thoroughly enjoying. So I don't care. I'm going to keep on going until either I can't go any further because it sucks, which it shouldn't, or yeah, I don't think there's any other reason why I'd stop. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So thank you so much for listening to Season 1 Ramble. I don't think there's anything else to really add. Only there'll be hopefully a few complimentary images that are thrown around, maybe. I don't know. Complimentary? Sure. I don't know. There'll be things. But thank you very much for watching. Please leave comments whether you liked or you hated this. Obviously, all feedback is appreciated. Something that I'm going to hopefully do is get some proper lighting in here. Maybe a studio light or something there, because this looks yellow as hell. Don't look good. I imagine the camera doesn't look good either. It's a standard def piece of shit, but it served me well for many years. So unfortunately, this is all you're going to get for a little bit. And we're going to put some lights in the decorative secretaire bookcase, so you can see a bit more of what's going on up here, a bit clearer, and this might be jiggled around when I get new stuff. But thank you so much for watching, taking the time. Please like, subscribe, and until the next time, we are going into time and space.